G'day YouTube. Warbles on a lot here. Just taking the tarp off the sting. In my obsessive compulsive control freak style of a way. Because if you're going to do science, then being in a control freak of a mood is probably not a bad thing. In all honesty, being a one-person operation, I will come back for the camera. And now we prep the bike. The more perspicacious of you will have noticed it's got no battery in it. But never thee mind, that we can rectify. The batteries live a pampered life in an insulated little niche right beside the hot air outlet from the heat exchanger, which is wrapped around the pot belly so as to collect 50% of the radiant heat coming out of the bell. And the heat exchanger draws cold air and forces it to go around the micro corrugated grooviness to increase the surface area of the heat absorption surface. Playing around with an infrared laser pointer thermometer tells me that the temperature of the air leaving the heat exchanger goes up as high as 120 degrees there, thermosiphoning merrily along uphill in an insulated duct, which does feature an insulated return line. Dude, you're going to love this. The return line is fed by the air inlet beside the mummified dead Antechinus, poisoned in the mouse plague. Because guess who's been too lazy to get in there past the kindergarten exercise books to go removing the dead rat that I didn't know was there, and is going to look pretty photogenic on the tubing of the U when it all comes down to it. So anyway, back to the story I was telling you. That there is a 240 volt 15 watt computer cooling fan, which is supposed to basically power, I think, 28 cubic feet per minute of air from under the bed on where the floor is coldest, and drive that air through the heat exchanger so it can then emerge. When it's all running in a stable fashion, you're looking at something like 40 degrees Celsius lower temperature here than what it is on that little bare metal window at the output end of the heat exchanger in the other room. So the point is, ignore that teenage soft porn remnant of when my son used to live here. as a teenager. This is where the batteries live, so they get basically bathed in warm air in an insulated little hutch, and that keeps them from getting below 10 or 12 degrees at night, because we have an insulated bunk room, centrally heated by a thermosiphon off the pot belly. Anyway, back to the motorcycle video, eh? Yesterday, I did a 46 kilometre trip on this battery, which is battery number 2. This is battery number 1. Battery number 1 has done about 96 charge-discharge cycles. Battery number 2 has done about 25, but I think battery number 2 might have been 10 months between manufactured in China and arriving at my place. I don't know which battery is performing best, which is the most storage efficient battery. So I've taken some careful figures with battery number 2 yesterday using the new electronic speed controller that came as a replacement on an extended warranty. Now I'll have a crack at doing the same ride on battery number 1, as identified by the single dot on the cover over its charge port. And it tells me it's vibrantly fully 100% full. Battery number 2, on the other hand, okay, there we go. It says it's around about the 40%. And yesterday, after a 46 kilometre ride, the bike said that it was 35% capacity remaining. The science today will be to do the same ride with this battery, riding more or less at the same level of gentleness or aggressiveness on the throttle, after first measuring the voltages. And here I want you to watch something that's just a little bit interesting. Now you have a look at the screen, 0 volts down there. This is the battery that just told us that it's 100% full. It's battery number 1. Now I put this into the charge port and it says it's 18.4 volts. We go back to unplugged, we test the other charge port, .1. Cute, isn't it? And it says that it's full. Okay, here's another fun trick. 18.6, 18.7 volts. We're on the first 2 pins in the charge port, and now when I push on the indicator, suddenly we've got 34.2 volts showing. I think there's sort of 2 parallel stacks of cells that are wired into one slab, maybe. I don't know, I'm not an expert. Now let's see what happens to the other set of charge pins. I'll leave you plugged in. 19.1 volts. Push the indicator and we go to 35.7 volts. I don't know why that is. It's an observation, unexplained. Somebody knows the explanation, but I'm not that bloke. Those of you who are familiar with my ways are aware that I'm a bit of a bugger for logbooks. So when I bought the electric motorbike, I started using the inside back page as a logbook, and I gradually, slowly developed a preferred set of observations, which more or less involves taking the motorbike's opinion of how full the battery is and then pronging the charge ports. And I was under the impression, operating under the assumption, that the circuitry of the bike would draw current from the battery, and that would give the reading at the charge port a falsely low reading. So here we make the change from petrol charging to solar charging. So all of these figures, every reading is with the motorbike switched off at the key. The battery is plugged in and the master knife switch is on. So all of a sudden, at the end of January, I pull battery 1 out of the bike, and I put battery 2 into the bike, and I come up with a much more abbreviated system of logging the journeys of the bike, where I get the date, the charge-discharge cycle, which battery, what percentage it is going in, the odometer reading beforehand, how many kilometres the trip is, and the odometer reading afterwards. All right. And that means I have had to start a parallel logbook for battery 1, taken over where the other one left off, and battery 2. And I recently learned, I don't know whether you can see it in there, but there's another more or less perturbing difference in measuring the battery voltage, which I've only come across recently. So first I'll put the battery into the bike and I'll show you what happens when we plug it in. This being something of a tight fit. Come around here and you have a look, see. Knife switch is on, is off rather. Battery says it's 100%. We've already seen what the voltages are through the charge ports. Is that not a complicated looking little plug? We have 6 connections to be made. So, poking the plug in connects those two 35 volt stacks to up 35 and 34 volt stacks up to something not quite 70 volts. It's a 60 volt battery. Okay, so I'm doing this so the camera can see what I'm doing, and I'm doing it the way I can see what I'm doing. Right, part 1, line 1, wrong battery. So we are on 94 charge-discharge cycles. And now, yeah, bugger that. We will extend that because I drew the line at the wrong spot. In the bike auto place, we will write down what we're going to see. $4,489. Normally I would actually check that. I'd check the actual reading. But I want to show you something, and I can't shoot the video in sequence while showing you that unless I fudge this figure. But anyway, we put the time in, 11:33, and then on top of that there line, I'm going to write the figure with the battery plugged into the bike, but the bike not switched on, right? And we'll get a figure, and then I'll show you something really weird. And we'll do this with the knife switch off. Still got access to the charge port. Okay, we got the 0 volts. We've got a prong in there. We poke it in there. 62.6. We prong the other charge port. 65.3. And we write that one in the book. There's the 65.3. We reach in here. Got to use my thumb on that. Get a click out of that. And would you look at that? All of a sudden, it's become 65.2. It did go up to 66 point something, but it's now on the 65.2. And when we 62.6, the bloody same, right? Okay, now, just for shits and giggles, let's apply the key. 63.3, what do you see? And now, pull out of the front pin, stick in the back. Stick in the back pin, poke you in the front pin, and yeah, 66.05, 66.1. Call it 66.05 because it's sort of circulating backwards and forwards there. So that also gets written in. Now in this column here, you can see I was writing down only one pair of pin readings before the ride and after the ride, consistently. And now, before I set off, I have to come up with 2 pairs of pin readings before and 2 pairs of pin readings after, because I've now noticed that there is a difference. And when it comes to graphing the performance of one battery against the performance of the other battery, if I come along here and graph this battery with the motorbike turned on, and I think I've got 66.05 volts, and last time I rode the bike, I measured it when the bike was switched off, and I only had 65.2 volts. Yeah, it can screw with your figures, and you can be diligently writing down your motorbike performance for a year and have no idea that there's a factoid like that going on under your nose without being noticed. What I don't understand is why the charge port readings for what the battery's got in terms of voltage are higher, consistently about 0.7 to 0.8 of a volt higher with the bike switched on while the headlights are sucking and the tail lights are sucking and the computer's running. That to me is beyond all comprehension. So I don't have an explanation for it. I do have the observation that that is what's going on. So now what I want to find out is whether this marvelous new brand new, well, free replacement electronic speed controller, which is an absolute stickler for not letting you go any faster than 46 kilometres an hour, which is 3 kilometres an hour slower than the old one. So you'd think 6% less current being turned into speed should give you approximately 12% greater range, all things being equal. And if the story I got told about how there was a component supplier who made a mess of potting the components in their casing, and therefore there was moisture ingress and corrosion from the condensation, and eventually these things stopped working, yeah, that would be a coherent explanation. But I think I've noticed a bit of a range decrease at the same time as I'm getting a speed decrease and a very great increase in the authority of the regenerative braking system, which once upon a time, it was a bit like being in top gear in a motor car and taking your foot off the accelerator. Yes, you got some exhaust braking, but it was nothing like pulling the handbrake on, and it was nothing near like putting your foot on the brake and engaging the front brakes. This used to be like taking the accelerator off and rolling against the engine, working it as an air compressor. It's now almost as strong a deceleration as you get when you put the handbrake on as hard as you can, rear brake. It's not up there with the front brake, but it does pitch you forward. You know, it compresses the front forks with the savageness of the regenerative braking. And as the bike slows down and it's got less kinetic energy, and for all intents and purposes, the electrical load from the part flat battery remains the same, the braking becomes actually more effective. So when you're down under 15 kilometres an hour, the jug, trying to tickle the throttle, it's yeah, not all that great. Although I must admit, I've never ever changed the regenerative brake setting in the whole time I've owned the bike. It's halfway between setting 3 and setting 4, with one up here and none over there, sort of thing. So maybe it's time to get somebody who knows what they're doing to talk to these 4 little buttons there and change the setting on me regenerative braking. Maybe go back to 2 and see whether it's tolerable. Maybe take it off entirely and see whether taking it off entirely allows the bike to roll down hills. Because I used to be able to roll down a hill at 53 kilometres an hour with the throttle on full, and the bike would have run out of puff assistance from the motor at 49. Now I go down that same hill at 47. So it is subjectively as if the new speed controller is functioning as regenerative braking when you're rolling down a hill and you'd quite like to roll faster. And maybe I can get rid of that feature by switching regenerative braking off altogether and relying on the idea of rolling along to turn kinetic energy into distance and just pre-planning all your stops. Because let's face it, if you're doing an emergency stop, the back wheel's more or less off the ground, so regenerative braking is not going to help that much that way. And it takes half a second to a second for the regenerative braking to kick in. You know, you roll back and there's a pause, and then you start into the pitch forward routine, which gets, as I said, more pronounced the slower the bike goes. Okay. So what I'm trying to do today is generate data on a 46 kilometre ride from here to the Severn River, on the Severn River Road, almost at Dundee. I would like to do the loop trip so I could compare it to a trip I did on Christmas Day. However, there's more water than my axle deep, and if I go deeper than axle deep, I reckon I'm going to start wetting the electrics, and then I won't have an electric motorbike, I'll have a lawn ornament. And the idea is to generate enough data to plot a third line on this graph. Now what you've got up here is volts. What you've got along the bottom is kilometres. And what you got up the side there is the indicated charge capacity remaining in the battery. And as you can see, the actual voltage that the multimeter tells you is available across the charge port is different regardless of the quote 100% indication given by the instrument panel. So what we've got here in a black line with a black dotted line with a red and black dotted line is Christmas Day last year, when I did 52 kilometres and I was indicating 33% of a battery charge after 52 kilometres, But that was on the original battery, and it was the original speed controller. Now what I do after, okay, we've plotted how much current for how much distance, I then project the drop-off line all the way down until it runs off the graph. So yeah, if you really wanted to totally flatten the battery, you would have got about 86 kilometres. And the manual says you can only get 70 kilometres before getting down to 10%. So the original battery, the original speed controller, it was genuine A1 Mickey Mouse on the numbers. And those battery voltages up there and down there, they were taken before I knew that you're going to get 2 levels of battery voltage with the key switched on or off. So I then, and bear in mind we're looking at the black lines, I measure the distance from 100% to 33%, right? And 66% of the battery capacity equals 81 millimeters. So 1% of the battery capacity is 1.227 millimeters. So then I multiply that by 23, and what happens is I come down here and I get a reading for 10%. And the theoretical, where I'm going to get to 10%, golly gosh, gee darn shucks, it runs smack dab on the 70 kilometers absolute range with 10% in reserve. Isn't that a clever little Chinaman in Hong Kong, designing and building that motoring of the cycle? However, over here on the 22nd, which is yesterday, I did a 46 kilometre ride because, as I said, the Severn River was up and I couldn't get across it. So I couldn't do the full 52 kilometre loop. But anyway, that was 100% down to 38%. But the 100% in this case was 64.35 volts over here, and the 38% was 55.8 volts. So each ride, you sort of start off comparing voltages and you wind up inferring battery charge capacities, and it's a bit of a mishmash as far as the figures go. But anyway, in this case, 62% of the battery was 87.3%, 87.3 millimeters. Therefore, 1% of the battery is 1.4 millimeters. So thus and because 10% at that point is all the way down here. I didn't even calculate a voltage figure on it, because what I wanted to do was intersect the dotted line as a projection at the 10% line and find out that at the moment I get down to 10% battery on battery number 2 with speed controller number 2 at about 67 kilometres. So I appear to have lost 3% of my range as well as 6% of my speed. And I just don't understand how the same motor with the same battery, allegedly with better waterproofing on the electronic circuits, admittedly, what's going on now is that it's better regulated to comply with the road rules and the laws. It doesn't let me speed by 6%. So that's kind of a bit sad, and I think that's kind of a stupid move from a road safety feature, because being honest, in my opinion, the slower I am on that, the faster someone can catch up on me unawares, particularly people who are speeding. I've been frightened a couple of times by people they've appeared within the 7-second cycle of me looking at the wing mirrors, and that means at 250 metres minimum distance, they must have been doing 160 kilometres an hour to be going so fast they have to overtake me on the inside while I'm riding in the centre of the lane. I was prepared to get off the road for them, but they were going too fast for me to have time, because, yeah, they got there between looking at that mirror, riding straight ahead, looking at that mirror, coming back to that mirror, and whoosh, they were around me. I think if I was able to ride on the road at the same speed the bike is capable of doing, and this one can do 75 kilometres an hour. The new ones, off-road. The new ones, road-registered versions, only do 45, just like this one. But the off-road versions of the new one are capable of 95. If it was lawful to ride it on the road at 95 kilometres an hour, I would pretty much sell this one to buy a new one so that I would blend in with the traffic smoother and have a lower incidence of me annoying other people by pottering along at 45 kilometres an hour. Don't know how I'd come up with the money. I'd probably have to live on nothing but rice for a while. But it could be done. It could be done, particularly if I got something of a reasonable price for a well-maintained motorbike with upgraded front forks and 2 batteries. However, I have yet to find out what's going on, and what I think might be going on is that battery number 2 might have lost 3 or 4 kilometres absolute range in the 10 months it sat on the shelf, switched off and sleeping between being manufactured and arriving up here to be put into the bike. So that's what today is to determine. Warbles wants data. Warbles wants to be able to draw a third line on the graph. So what we're going to do is use sunlight stored and collected about a week ago and held there in the battery in the bunk room, kept warm at night by a thermosiphon driven potbelly heated central ducted system. That's about as close as I can go to having only one variable in the experiment. We've got the same bike, the same motor, the same battery, the same route over the same terrain, the same distance, and I'm going to try and ride it in the same kind of a style, and we'll see what actually happens, and then I will plot another line. There we go, at the front gate, going 1 kilometre. It's actually 1.5 kilometre, but this thing only goes up in increments of 1 at a time, and we've been using 13 watt hours per kilometre to get here. I'm now switching the bike off. I don't know whether you can see that there, and back on, so that ideally I can get a average speed reading from Bitumen up the Severn River and back. Admittedly, I'm going to turn around, and I'm not going to frig around with switching it on and off again back there. So now I get to put the other glove on. It was this stage where I forgot to turn the bloody camera on yesterday and wasted the introduction of a video. And I don't know whether the battery will have sufficient capacity in it to record an hour's video on top of what we've already done. I'll see what we can see. But that's what it's got in front of it. Okay. Oops. $22, $27, $34, $35, $40, $41, $48, 59 watt hours per kilometre in economy at 28 kilometres an hour. It's actually briefly showed 95 watt hours per kilometre, now coming back down through 55. Right, roll the throttle off. We've got no regenerative braking. We're now in sport mode. $59, $60, $61, down to 47 again. Back down to 49. 54. Anyway, 46 kilometres an hour. 47 watt hours per kilometre. Drop down to 44. Hovering around the 44, 45 watt hours per kilometre. Kilometre from the gate, 43 watt hours per kilometre, and yeah, so it occurs to me that this is probably a good opportunity for episode 16 in the Trumpocalypse Chronicles, and there's been quite a lot going on. This morning I learned that it has been revealed that the Kingdom of Qatar did not suddenly, apropos of nothing, offer the Trump administration a free gift of a 13-year-old discontinued Boeing 747 which has not been in production for 5 or 10 years. He'd seen the thing and he liked it. It was very palatial. It had lots of gold plate in it and he wanted it. He wanted one. It looked lovely to him. And he's apparently been bored with the Boeing 707s that they've been using as Air Force One. They're going down a hill, 41 watt hours, 46 kilometres an hour. He's bored with the Boeing 707. It doesn't interest him that the Boeing 707 has been hardened against electromagnetic pulse. It's been hardened against electronic eavesdropping. It's been shielded against accidentally broadcasting radio messages from the water pump in the toilet because somebody stuck an extra USB on the electric motor. The whole aircraft has been specifically designed as an airborne command post to the Commander-in-Chief of the US military. It's capable of mid-air refuelling, so it can stay up there for about a month until it runs out of maintenance. Extra pumps and oil tanks so that you don't have to stop to top up the oil sort of thing. 2 kilometres down 1%. Make it 3.5 kilometres because I re-zeroed the clock at the front gate. So that's why it turns out that even if the Air Force accepts this 747 that's out of date with old-fashioned technology that nobody wants, that Qatar's been trying to get rid of, sell it at a discount for a couple of years because, you know, they rather prefer their Airbus, something new, something modern, something actually high-tech. So yeah, they're only too pleased to bequeath to Donnie Trump, POTUS 45, 47, the aeronautical equivalent of a kerosene-burning white elephant. It's no good for anything except impressing people who are too stupid to understand what it costs to keep the thing going. But yeah, he come up with a great big bullshit story claiming that they offered to give it to him for free. Turns out that in actual fact, he went begging for it. Meanwhile, because they wanted Starlink connections to their rural police stations, the President of South Africa took along a couple of his government ministers, and he had the presence of mind to take some of his white government ministers with him to a meeting in Trump's infamous bloody gold leaf encrusted Oval Office. The awful office, is how I think of it. And while he was in there, Trump basically attempted to lecture him on the topic of how it was wicked and evil and nasty that his government in South Africa was secretly conducting a genocide of white farmers so that they could pinch the land off them. Old mate happily, he'd lined his ducks up in a row. He got his agriculture minister, who was a white fella, to explain that, well, actually, in South Africa, 7% of the population is white. They own 75% of all the land, and it's a terribly lawless sort of a society. Last year there were 1,600 people killed on farms by criminals just going out of town looking for a farmhouse to rob and rape, loot, pillage and burn at. And out of all those 1,600 who were killed in 2024 on farms, 12 of them were white. 12 out of 1,600, that does not sound like any style of a white genocide to me, or to anybody else, which is perhaps probably why none of the news organisations are carrying what Donald Trump thinks is a big story and a reason to let 57 white supremacists who couldn't afford a ticket to get out of there, bring them to America and give them citizenship and a MAGA hat. There was a bit of aerial drone footage of a whole lot of cars which were actually driving slowly down a road leading to a cemetery, and they were going there to bury 2 white farmers. So the Farmers Association had come up with a whole lot of white crosses, all made the same day, all the same age, put them all alongside the road, and it was part of the funereal memorial effort. You know, these farmers have died in violence and all the rest of it. There is a place called the Hindman Farmers Memorial, and it's got the names of everybody who was killed from 1961, year I was born, up to the present. Now we're doing 47 kilometres an hour. I've throttled off, I'm maintaining 47, but I'm certainly not seeing 50 going down the hill. So I guess when I was coming down here on the old speed controller, it must have been adding some amount of power up to 47. Or this speed controller is functioning as an overspeed brake. Very cunning, the people who put it together. So anyway, back to the story in South Africa. The memorial that's been running since 1961, it's got 6,000 or 7,000 names on it, and it's not just the white farmers. It's also all of the non-white farm workers who've been killed in criminal violence on farms. And it turns out that there was somebody else who brought up the figure, and, you know, because they were white men, Trumpy sat up and, you know, he quietly listened. He didn't agree with it, he didn't like hearing it, but he didn't rudely contradict them the way he did with Zelensky. They brought up the point that 7% of South Africa's population is white, but in the annual murder and statistics, only 2% of the murder victims are white. So white people in South Africa are actually underrepresented 3.5 times. 350% less chance of dying at the hands of a violent criminal in South Africa if you're white than if you're black. That doesn't mesh well with the narrative that Trumpy's been fed by Elon Musk and Peter Thiel and a few other white South African cultural refugees who got out of the place as soon as Nelson Mandela said, all you rich white South Africans who don't want to live in a free and democratic South Africa, take your filthy fucking money and run. Go away, go and live somewhere where you're welcome. And they did. So by and large, you've got a measuring stick for good South Africans and white South Africans. Before Nelson Mandela was let out of jail, the only white South Africans you met outside the country were the good ones, because they'd left all their money behind in order to get away from the place. After Nelson Mandela was let out of jail, all the good South African refugees got totally outnumbered by the people who were allowed to take their money, and they looked around the world to see where they could go and treat blackfellas like shit. And they thought, well, Jan Smuts went to Australia in the 1920s and had a look at the Queensland native police system, where you have all the blackfellas living in a little township or a ghetto outside of town with only one road leading to it, and one water pipe and one electricity line, and make them dig a hole in the ground and shit in that. So in 1948, after helping the Pommies win the Second World War, that's what Jan Smuts set up for the apartheid system. And that was when Elon Musk's grandfather migrated from Canada to South Africa so he could participate in a racist white technocratic society, because he'd been a member of the technocracy movement, which kicked off in the 1930s. And apparently it's pretty popular in the right-wing, over-cashed up classes in America to be recycling all these old 1930s fascist fantasies. They'd really like to have a white race-based dictatorship run by a technological elite, basically starting at the Mexican border and running right up to Alaska, all the way through Canada, and get Greenland as well. And the people who want to basically operate the world with robots controlled by artificial intelligence, they're really interested in Greenland because there's a couple of kilometres of ice overhead, and although the ice is melting, when it melts there's a lot of mineral resources under the ice, and to make it melt faster they want to put their data centres and their server farms under the ice and use meltwater. In order to cool their bloody computers, which in one sense it's probably less selfish than the current plan, where Microsoft is going to Spain and Portugal, where the authorities and the local government are much more amenable to bribes than most other places in the world. And they're building huge data centres there and diverting all the water that the people have been relying on for their daily life and their agriculture. That's all going to feed the server farms, and of course global warming's feeding the friggin' drought anyway. 34 watt hours per kilometre, 90% battery remaining, 10 kilometres from the front gate, so that's 11 kilometres, nearly 12 from the hut. So that's their big plan. The effort to lobotomise and decapitate and defund every regulatory civic governance mechanism in the United States is being wiped out. The currency is being wiped out. Medicaid and SNAP, some kind of supplementary feeding supplement, they're all being wiped out. Basically, I think in order to get the supplementary feeding, you've got to do 80 hours work a month. So gradually the United States population, unless they're already rich enough to be considered part of the elite, they're being whittled down to the situation where they're going to become literally indentured labourers. If they don't go where they're told to go, do what they're told to do, show up to work and work really fucking hard at whatever it is that pleases their boss, they're not going to get fed. They already don't get treated for their illnesses. And the way things are going on the streets there, anybody can be picked up by ICE and dragged away, incarcerated in a detention centre with no paperwork, not appearing before a judge. They haven't quite publicly proclaimed that the great writ of habeas corpus has been abolished, but the head of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, in front of a congressional committee of inquiry into her own budget could not explain or define or tell anybody what habeas corpus means. She was exactly 150% wrong, you know. She thought habeas corpus is part of the Constitution which allows the President to deport anybody without having any due process in court. She got it exactly fucking backwards. The sort of idiot who shoots her dog for growling at her when she's acting like a dickhead. And that's your regenerative braking when you're below 90%. And at the moment, academics in America who study history and government, and particularly the history of totalitarian regimes, they're literally pulling up stakes, selling up, moving to Europe, going anywhere to get out of America. They can see the writings on the wall, and the writing on the wall basically says, we are now officially living in the time which school kids will later look back on and ask, why didn't anybody do anything? Something to stop it. But as I mentioned months ago, look, they're trucks. Once you start a collapse like the one that's going on in the US, there's nothing you can do in order to arrest it or stop it or bring it to a halt. That's assuming that anybody wanted to stop it or arrest it or bring it to a halt. 42% of the American population at the moment say they approve of Trump and what he's doing. Apparently, they actively look forward to living in a third world nation as indentured labourers because they can't imagine it happening. They thought he meant it when he said he was going to make America great again by cutting taxes on billionaires. If you can get any of them to sit down and tell you when they think America used to be great, they'll tell you it was back in the 1950s when it wasn't very great for black people. It wasn't much good for women either. But back in the 1950s, rich people in America paid a lot more tax than poor people did, and nobody got away with not paying their tax. At the end of World War II, all the people who'd fought in World War II were quite satisfied with the idea that they'd been fighting against totalitarian dictatorships in which the elites told everybody else where to labour, and the labourers and the workers got no say in the matter. Gradually, over the last 85 years, that entire principle has been shat upon from a great height. Ripped to pieces, fed to the wood chipper. It's bordering on humorous in my opinion. I'll let this fella go past me here. Rather than having trying to overtake me on that crest. See, he doesn't want to bloody get onto the left-hand side of the road even now. Yeah, everybody who fought in World War II was quite happy with the idea that they were going to come back to an egalitarian paradise. A couple of our prime ministers fought in World War II on both sides of politics. A fella called John Gorton had a pretty smashed up looking face from where he crashed his Commonwealth Aircraft Corporation boomerang. I don't know whether it was in Borneo or Papua New Guinea, but you know, he put it on the ground and it stopped faster than he did. And Edward Gough Whitlam was a navigator on Lockheed Hudson. He was the bloke who actually got elected, formed a kitchen cabinet of two with Jim Cairns and implemented absolutely everything that makes Australia worthwhile these days, like pensions for unmarried parents, single parents pensions. Prior to that there was only, I think there might have been a widow's pension. There was certainly old age pensions, but yeah, single parents pension was a Gough Whitlam idea. Medicare was a Gough Whitlam idea. Putting reticulated sewage into Sydney's western suburbs was a bloody Gough Whitlam idea. The idea of democratic socialism, having everybody pay a reasonable amount of tax so the government's got enough money to do all the things that matter, so that everybody rides on the road for a nominal registration fee of their vehicle. It basically gives the government an excuse to inspect it and make sure it's fit and safe to operate. 20% of the battery gone for 16 kilometres, 37 watt hours per kilometre at 45 kilometres an hour, coming up to the top of that little hill. Yeah, it's still reaching 46 on the flat. So basically what Trump and his mates are doing for all sorts of individual reasons, there is no overall overarching plan. The Federationist Society and the Heritage Foundation, they wanted to have an almost king-like president